Hello, everybody. Hello, everyone here in this wonderful church building of First Church of Christ Scientist in France. And of course, hello to everyone watching online. We are so grateful that you are here joining us for this lecture. And thank you to the members of this church for taking the risk and the opportunity to inviting a German woman who is not capable of speaking a lot of French words to a French town giving an English lecture. But this lecture will be read by a church member behind my version of the English version of this lecture. So let's breathe out. Yes, let's take a moment to settle down and think. The time for thinkers has come. We are not waiting for that time. So let's think today, right in that second, and from that second on, and let's not stop anymore. So what are miracles for you? Have you ever truly and deeply thinking about that? And you might already have experienced something you'd consider as a miracle. I'm pretty sure that some of us already experienced things that contradicted what is considered as usual process of things. Here's one of the various examples I found in a newspaper. The headline says, "The miracle of a fall." A toddler and his aunt had visited a waterfall in Wales. They were on a cliff when the boy slipped and fell 150 foot, that's 50 meters, into just a 2-foot pool of water. That's about 1 centimeter. He survived the fall with just a scratch on his face. His aunt had tried to grab him, but she fell 25 foot. She too had no significant injuries. An eyewitness said, "I heard the screams. I saw a man bringing the boy." So that is what the physical senses told this man. And then he thought, and he was talking about that, "I thought he was dead. It was a miracle. They survived. They both should have died. I felt like it was something divine." Okay, this man felt it was something divine. Let's see to which conclusion we'll come during this lecture today. As we explore this subject today, I'm going to share a couple of examples with you of experiences that from one perspective could seem pretty miraculous, but from another perspective are totally normal and natural. Normally and natural for anyone. I like to go step by step, and I think it's helpful to have a common point of view at each step we take together, so that we have the same perspective on what we are then looking at together. That way we can make sure that we are actually talking about the same thing. That's why we are starting with the definition of the word miracles from a German dictionary, and that's called the New Brockhaus. And there it is an explanation for the word miracles like this. It's a happening which is in contradiction to the usual natural order of things or to the laws of nature. So according to this definition, miracles are something unnatural, inexplicable. However, let's go one step further. because of course there are, as always, other viewpoints. A quote which is from theologian Augustinus Aurelius says, "Miracles don't happen in contradiction to nature, but only in contradiction to what is known about nature." What? The dictionary says that miracles are in contradiction to nature, but Aurelius encourages us to view miracles from a totally other viewpoint. He says that miracles aren't a contradiction to nature. He says that miracles merely contradict what we've been thinking about nature so far. What an exciting point of view. We can either persist in the viewpoint the dictionary takes, or we can open up to the possibility that there simply is much more to explore about nature we ever have been imagined. Are you ready for that? Let me tell you a story about a horse that also calls into question what we might typically think about what is normal and natural. So I got an email from a woman. There she describes the circumstance as follows. A horse was very ill, and so they had called the doctor to examine it. He found out that the lungs were bleeding inwardly. They suffered from a fungal disease. Due to this, the horse was losing a lot of blood. They gave some drugs, but it got worse. After some days, the doctor suggested to give the death injunction right away because he considered the disease as incurable. The woman suggested to wait 2 more days, and the doctor agreed. At that day, she wrote me that email where she asked me for my prayerful support. And so we prayed kind of together for that horse. And the point of such prayer is to experience the kind of shifts in viewpoint we'll be talking about today. 2 days later, the doctor examined the horse again and couldn't believe what he saw, but had to admit the complete healing of the horse, which couldn't be explained from his perspective. This experience is something which we, if staying with what we've been knowing about nature so far, might consider as a contradiction to the usual process of things. From the medical standpoint, the usual process almost certainly would have a painful death due to loss of blood, which from that standpoint couldn't be stopped. Nevertheless, the bleeding stopped because a disease which was considered incurable healed in between some hours. We simply could say, "Oh, that's a miracle," and leave it there. If we proceed this way, we would live exactly the way the German author and poet Gregor Brandt describes. He said, "What people can't explain, they call a miracle." But let's take a closer look on the topic of miracles. Even our dictionary gives a hint that there is more to explore. In addition to the definition I already shared with you, it has. In religion, miracles are regarded as being the manifestation of divine might and of divine action. God's sovereignty shows up in a perceivable way. So the dictionary also offers a broader view on what miracles are. With a miracle, God's mighty power is demonstrated. This divine power gets perceivable amidst day-to-day life. What that means can be interpreted many different ways depending on one's view of what God is. In fact, a definition like that calls into question the whole nature of reality. In this context, a statement of Robert Musil, a novelist and playwright, is interesting to look at. He said, Miracles come true only because they are merely another, always present kind of reality. Miracles came true only because they are merely another, always present kind of reality. Might this be? Miracles, in a way, simply another kind of reality, which is always present, everywhere. Or possibly better put, another view of the one and only reality. What kind of reality could that be? What could we say about its quality? Would its quality not necessarily need to be absolutely wonderful? Just think about that. If with a miracle, God's power is demonstrated here and now for everyone, then a miracle shows something of the divine kind of reality. It shows something of the divine manner, of the divine quality, something of the divine nature. So about what God is. And in addition to that, it would show something about the relationship between God and man. It makes sense that the nature of this divine power, which causes such wonderful experiences we call miracles, is completely good. And so the divine power is the good itself. And so the nature, we also can say the principle of this always present kind of divine reality has to be pure good. And it is here and now for everyone to experience. This would mean that there is a divine power, a divine principle, which is completely good. And miracles are a proof that it is possible to experience this divine presence. So we are not talking about the sovereignty of a man-like being in the clouds that only favors some people. It's not a power for some and not others. It's not from a big personality that likes and dislikes, or that uses people like pieces in a cosmic game which can't be understood. Miracles could be said to actually give us insights in this divine nature, meaning the divine manner, and so the divine law and order. So miracles would prove the presence of the divine principle. And miracles would show that this principle is perceivable for everyone. It's perceivable because God relates to man. Miracles are wonderful experiences of healing, supply, and safety. They are pure good. And this shows that there is a relationship between God and man, which is pure good. And which not only is pure good, but brings pure good. Again, let's be quiet and allow this. Let's breathe out and take this step further. How pitiful would it be to not recognize and not use these insights, to use them to get new viewpoints, to use them to get deeper insights into this relationship and in the divine manner of reality and in its divinely natural laws from which these miracles arise. It's a little bit like math. We've learned that 2 + 2 equals 4. Following the same principle, 2 million + 2 million equal 4 million. It's the same principle behind it. It's only that the Latin numbers are more impressive. The principle which underlies the calculation. So where is it? Can you show it to me? Can you let me touch it? That's not possible because it's invisible. But the calculation kind of makes it visible. It makes it perceivable. And even though you can't touch the principle, it kind of gets graspable. It kind of gets obvious through its effects, even though the principle itself is invisible and stays invisible. In math, the procedure which is necessary to make the principle obvious is calculate. We also can put it this way. To calculate demonstrates the principle of math. To say that miracles don't happen in contradiction with nature would imply that there is an invisible principle behind the miracle and a practical procedure which leads to make this principle perceivable and obvious, just as in math. It would mean that we can find spiritual laws, divine laws. These laws are rooted in the nature of God. They are therefore based on the divine principle and are rooted in the nature of God. And they are reliable. And when they are touched in any way, they lead to glorious experiences that make visible the ever-present good. Whenever these experiences contradict what we consider normal from a material perspective, we call them miracles, like this man who saw the boy and his aunt falling down. And we will call them miracles on and on until we understand that they are actually normal and natural because they are based and caused on and by a divine law. And that's the point of view from which this lecture starts and looks around. The inner point of view, yes, miracles are divinely natural, and we are able to comprehend and experience them. Not because miracles claim the power of another alternative reality and bring that power to another place where we are now, but because they prove more about the one and only reality that exists right now, the divine reality that is here and now, all that actually is. And although it seems otherwise, the divine nature is the only nature that actually exists. And we can set out step by step to prove it. I invite you to mentally explore this standpoint. It's the inner standpoint that there is but one God, meaning one source and one creation, one reality that is pure good, because the sole principle or cause of all existence is, always has been, and always will be pure good. So often the word God is rejected because of what people have heard about it. But if we can lay aside those notions for a moment and consider that God is life itself, truth itself, and love, the sole cause or principle of creation, it can begin to put the questions we are asking about miracles into a perspective that makes them more understandable, even more repeatable. If God is the source from which every one of us comes, and from which every law governing what is real and natural comes, and God is solely good, then everything that's good has a reason for existing and an explanation behind it. And that which is unlike life, truth, and love doesn't have an inherent reason for existing. From this viewpoint, we all have a nature that must be entirely good. We are destined for good, not for evil, not for sickness, not for victimation or division with others. Even our very capacity to understand what is real and good must also inevitably flow from this one pure, good God. No, this is not about being blind or ignorant. And I know that there are throning arguments which contradict my statements. We can all see the various problems which seem to be all around. Disease, lack, wars, loneliness, distress, and so on. But I'm suggesting that it's possible to do more than just stop at the point of seeing those things. I think we can even do more than just stopping at the point of doing human steps to help. All the human steps to help are important and necessary, and it's normal for every one of us to be full of respect for all the courageous men and women who even risk their own lives in order to help others. However, what we are exploring today is the viewpoint that there's even more which can be done, something more profound, something which would work deeper at the roots of problems instead of dealing with the symptoms of these roots. Something that not only would be a huge help for the helpers, but which would lift our consciousness up to a viewpoint where we could see more and more happenings which are full of wonders. A standpoint where problems would dissolve naturally, like mist dissolves in the face of the sun. It means that problems are more a misconception about reality than they would be a part of reality. This means that what happens during a miracle then is a kind of correction of this false conception. Like in math, for someone who knows the math rules can easily use them. And by using them, he or she is able to show that which is right. Faults disappear during that process. In some situations, this may seem to happen in an instant. In other cases, especially in regards to entrenched character or society issues, it may take very diligent and humble persistence. This persistence is always building on the ground of this whole other sense of reality and power. How can we even begin to believe this? How could we prove it? To do so, we can avail ourselves with different means. First, observations, healings, and logical considerations, meaning conclusions of the observations and healings. That's a normal scientific approach. Observations show us that there are things happening, even though they are in contradiction to what is considered as being normal. I gave you the report of the newspaper, and there are more of those reports. I gave you the healing of the horse, and there are more of those healings going on around the world. And here's another one. It was a Friday when someone called me and told me that she was just been diagnosed with cancer. She was in panic, pain, and huge fear. The doctor was highly alerted because he was sure that the woman should start with medical treatment immediately. He sent her to hospital right away. There she was examined again and was told that due to the seriousness of the results, he had to expect that a major operation is quite likely. The exact means would be dependent on the results of the laboratory examinations. She should call the doctor the following Monday morning. I told her that I will pray with her along the lines of what we've been discussing today, and that she should call me right away after she called the doctor on Monday morning. By the way, prayer in Christian Science means to live inside oneself the deep longing for God. It is to let grow inside oneself the inner readiness to being transformed by God's divine power. Such a prayer brings oneself to a deep faith that with God, all good things are possible right now. Such a prayer brings with it this inner change of standpoint from where the power that heals can be experienced for oneself and for others. Okay, so on Monday morning, I waited for the woman's phone call. It got noon. It got afternoon. No call. In the evening, she called me in order to tell me that she just forgotten to call the doctor. Finally, he had called her in the evening and asked why she had not called him as it was appointed. He was quite astonished about that, and not only about that. He told her that there is no disease at all, and that he couldn't believe what he saw in his follow-up examinations. So he had looked it all over again and again, and finally had to admit that there was no longer any evidence of disease. Even later examinations of the woman showed her complete health. So not one of the original symptoms which had seriously alarmed the doctors were to be found anymore. Everything was as it should be. Everything was natural and normal. You can see that the change of standpoint actually had taken place in the fact that the woman just forgot to call the doctor. Who will forget to call a doctor when just got such a serious diagnosis? But the change of standpoint was so radical that she was kind of born anew. Neither I nor she ignored evil. I prayed. Let's say I took the divine standpoint with her, and she told me that it was the atmosphere of our phone call which changed something in her mind. She said she was calmed and she was awoken from her fear. She couldn't understand everything we discussed, and she couldn't believe what was said about God and God's creation. But she kind of felt it. She felt that this is the truth. She didn't know a lot about Christian Science, and she always thought that it's just nonsense. But this time, she felt differently. She started to think about God and creation in a new way. First, it felt like a fight in her mind, but more and more she calmed down. She felt as if she was held by a force, held by the hugeness of truth. This took more and more room in her consciousness, so that she finally just forgot about the whole thing, because she was completely filled with thoughts about God's presence and might. And even more importantly, she felt loved. She felt loved from divine love itself. Did this just happen by chance? The thing we read in the newspaper, the healing of the horse, the healing I just spoke about, and all the other examples of unexpected healing, protection, and care, everything just by chance? Should we just say, oh, how miraculous, and leave it there? I can't. We each can dig deeper, and this is a scientific approach. As I said, a scientific approach is to observe and to use examples and to learn from doing so. And it's quite normal to use textbooks. Textbooks which offer know-how about the examined subject. And in Christian Science, the Bible is one of these textbooks. This is a lecture about Christian Science. So it gives insights standing on the viewpoint of Christian Science. Christian Science was explored by intensive exploration of the Bible. So the entrance to Christian Science was kind of through the doors of the Bible. And with doors, I mean the book and the words in this book. These doors might be loved or despised. They might appear close or open. They might be recognized very clearly or vague and mysterious. However, in Christian Science, the Holy Bible is the book of books. It's the textbook of life. But it's not about a literal or intellectual approach to the Bible. And it's not about quarreling about singular meanings of the words contained. It's about being touched and moved by the spirit behind the words. And this movement of thoughts and consciousness leads to new standpoints, to new viewpoints, to new perspectives. And that is exactly what this woman had experienced. I think and hope that it's still commonly known that the Bible reports about lots of wonders God did. At this point, the circle to our dictionary, the New Brockhaus, gets closed. Remember that it talks about the extended definition of the word miracles, when it says that they are a manifestation of the divine power and a divine action amidst human day-to-day life. Exactly as such a process, the discoverer and founder of Christian Science understood a healing she once experienced. Her name is Mary Baker Eddy, and she lived from 1821 to 1910 in the United States of America. She talks about this experience as the falling apple. I will soon read her report about this healing, which can be found in her autobiography, Retrospection and Introspection, and that's the French version of that book. You will hear about a serious accident Mary Baker Eddy had. Some, in fact, like the minister of her church, had given her up and were expecting her very immediate death. It also is good to know that she read in the Bible when the miracle of her healing happened. In addition to that, it's good to know that she had been intensely engaged in finding out about the impulse and process of healing over several years before. There was a force inside of her consciousness which drew her to explore the impetus of healing more and more. Besides medicine, she tried out the water cure and homeopathy. From childhood on, she had been praying to God in order to help humans and animals. Occasionally, there were impressive results, but these weren't the norm. And she yearned to see more alleviation from suffering, both from her own chronic problems as well as from the hardships and tragedy she watched others face. Over the time, she noticed particular trends, especially the beliefs that the mental state of patients she took when she practiced homeopathy played the biggest part in their recovery, and that cases were able to be healed with no medicine at all. In the years just preceding her own life-changing experience, she even saw the healing of some others through her prayers alone, although she couldn't explain it at that time. She learned with each experience and through all she observed and intuited that even physical healing is a total mental process. And finally, she got her breakthrough in this insight. She explains it like this. It was in Massachusetts in February 1866 that I discovered the science of divine metaphysical healing, which I afterwards named Christian Science. The discovery came to pass in this way. During 20 years prior to my discovery, I had been trying to trace all physical effects to a mental cause. And in the latter part of 1866, I gained the scientific certainty that all causation was mind and every effect a mental phenomenon. My immediate recovery from the effects of an injury caused by an accident, an injury that neither medicine nor surgery could reach, was the falling apple that led me to the discovery how to be well myself and how to make others so. Even to the homeopathic physician who attended me and rejoiced in my recovery, I couldn't then explain the modus of my relief. I could only assure him that the divine spirit had wrought the miracle, a miracle which later I found to be in perfect scientific accord with divine law. So in the very moment of the healing, she felt that it was a divine power and action which induced the healing. And full of marvel and deeply moved, she called this happening a miracle. However, she, with the same breath, tells us that later on, she understood that this miracle was in accord with a law, namely with divine law. Searching the Bible more deeply than ever before helped her to this conclusion. She wrote, "The Bible was my textbook. It answered my questions as how to I was healed, but the scriptures had to me a new meaning, a new tongue. Their spiritual significance appeared, and I apprehended for the first time in their spiritual meaning Jesus' teaching and demonstration, and the principle and rule of spiritual science and metaphysical healing. In a word, Christian Science. Everything Christian Science teaches you can find in the textbook of Christian Science. Its name is Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy, and that's a French version of it. And that's the other textbook I use. There you can find the following definition of the word miracle on page 591. Miracle, that which is divinely natural, but must be learned humanly. Christian Science is there to nurture this understanding. It's there to encourage us all to reconsider current viewpoints. For example, the viewpoint that problems like disease are normal and natural. Christian Science is there to encourage us to taking the standpoint that problems are the things which are abnormal and unnatural, instead of health and harmony being the things which are astonishing when they appear. We can effectively do something against disease, dispute, and lack because they are not normal, not natural, and not based on a law. Harmony, function, and supply is that which is reliable because these things are based on law and so on reality. Shortly said in Christian Science, the process of healing is explained as being the awakening to this norm. So-called spontaneous healings then are the sudden awakening to this norm. It's the power of the divine spirit which causes this awakening. And spirit is another name. The Bible talks about God. It's a word that helps me focus on the substantiality and power of God. Spirit fills all space. And we can awake to the insight that the presence of the divine spirit constitutes everything, and of course, our inner being. This awakening from within then captures everything else, including the body. That's the position in Christian Science. So we can see that bodies aren't ignored, but they are cared for, and they are freed from illness, from scary thoughts, and in the end, They are freed from all materialistic points of view. So it's not the body which is made to vanish into thin air, but the problems which might burden it. Nothing can restrain us to first look in that direction, then to take that standpoint, and then to look out from that standpoint. It might be that you consider this as radical, but it's just an inner change of standpoint, not more, but not less. It's not that someone's mentality changes a physical body. It's that everything, including the way we think of ourselves and our bodies, is lifted up to a more spiritual point of view, a view more rooted in a sense of reality, completely governed by God, by truth, by life and love. When the originator of Christianity, Jesus Christ, trod the world scene, he brought such a radical change of standpoint with him. He, by his sermons, parables, and healings, rejected a lot of that what was considered as normal and natural, including beliefs of what would be divinely natural. For example, the belief that diseases and problems were sent by God in order to punish or educate man. If disease and problems would have been sent by God, then Jesus would have worked against God and against God's education with each healing. So he would have been in distress with God, but he wasn't. And so he deprived such beliefs of their foundation. According to the Bible, Jesus said, and that's from Matthew, "Think not that I'm come to destroy the law. I'm not come to destroy, but to fulfill." Jesus restored bodies and human lives, which meant that disease, lack, and limitations vanished. So Jesus proved that disease and lack aren't based on a law, and that they aren't caused by a law and aren't sustained by a law. So these things can't be a part of the law which Jesus came to fulfill, because he, who didn't come to destroy the law, caused such things to vanish. So Jesus demonstrated by the healings that disease has no law behind it, and so it's not normal. Diseases aren't a part of God's creation. Furthermore, he proved that they aren't sent by God. Since Jesus healed, he demonstrated that health fulfills the law. So health is given and sustained by law. And that's why health is normal. Health is a part of God's creation. Health is a law of God, and all that is good has such a law behind it. Jesus not only disproved religious beliefs, but also medical and so secular opinions. He disproved that material conditions would determine people to be healthy or diseased. He disproved that the cause of disease would be determined by material patterns, and he disproved that some diseases are incurable. In the Gospel according to St. John, you can read about the healing of a man who was born blind. You can read about a civil action Jesus did. He spat on the ground, made clay of the spittle, and spread it on the eyes of the blind man. Then he said unto him to go and wash. The man did so and came back with full eyesight. So think, Jesus spit on the ground. Even today, spitting on something expresses abyssal disdain. If Jesus had used the ground as a means for healing, wouldn't he have been more likely to bless the ground? But he spit on it, and then after putting it on the man's eyes, commanded him to wash it off. In this way, we could say he demonstrated that for getting healed, it was necessary to purify oneself by washing off material beliefs. Even his disciples needed this seeable demonstration, which you can realize reading what had happened beforehand. Namely, when the blind man had shown up before Jesus and his disciples, they asked him, "Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, so that he was born blind?" This was what in these days was believed about heredity. But Jesus showed them that even heredity is no law. Let me put the whole scene into these words. Cease to think and believe in material categories. Rather choose to wash them away. Then you will be able to awake and see. Christ Jesus demonstrated that effects of false beliefs and their symptoms can vanish immediately, in 1 second. Yes, and that bodies are able to be healthy as soon as a belief in the power of matter is just washed away. This inner purity, this spirituality enables man to recognize himself as being filled with divine good, which has ever been present. Our desire can be based on this foundation, and we can inwardly cry out together with the psalmist. Open thou mine eyes, that I may behold wondrous things out of thy law. To realize God as universal, as all-pervasive principle is fundamental in Christian Science. A principle is incorporeal and omnipresent and impartial, so it's reliable. God is the divine principle, which is life, truth, and love. Even though it's invisible, it's perceivable. Like the principle of math is invisible but perceivable. We make the mathematical principle of addition come alive by adding up. We make the mathematical principle of multiplying come alive by multiplying. We learn to do so, and we are living with it. And no one complains about the invisibility of this principle. We also can learn to live, think, feel, and act in accord with divine principle of truth, life, and love. It was Jesus' very being to live in accordance with the divine principle of truth, life, and love. And so his being was one with the divine. And so he expressed the divine in the highest degree possible here on earth. So let me put it this way. Through his accordance, he gave the divine principle a seeable shape. He embodied it, showed it, demonstrated it. And the results were healing, liberation, and supply. And he called upon others to heal. In Matthew, you can read, heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils. These were his instructions. And he gave this promise, and that's from John. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me, the works that I do, shall he do also. The power behind the works is the Christ. In Christian Science, Christ is understood as the divine manifestation of God, which comes to the flesh to destroy incarnate error. This divine activity and power gets visible through the lives of people who are transparent for this divine effective power. It was the Christ, meaning this divine activity which brought forth the miracles of the prophets, of Jesus and his disciples. And this same power is here today and at all times. It was the power of the divine spirit which Mary Baker Eddy felt when she experienced the healing in 1866 and in all her other healing work. And it's the same power I experienced during the examples I just shared with you. The physical man, Jesus of Nazareth, is the way shower. He shows the way to the Christ. Christ is the way to be. And this divine being, when it comes to the flesh, is the power that melts all fleshly evil in its own glory. So Christ is the manifestation of God's divine power. And this manifestation very naturally determines the disappearance of all which is unlike God. And that's why it disappears like darkness in the face of the light. This disappearance of evil through the appearance of God's mighty glory is what is going on with all the miracles we can encounter. When we get more and more awake in God's nature. This includes a realization of our relationship with God, which is inseparable. In the words of the Bible, we can say that this means that we awake in the image and likeness of God. Our true and ever-present relationship, our identity is this wonderful image and likeness. We can awake in that glorious being which always is present. Jesus wasn't born into a perfect world which approved his healings or his teachings. To the contrary, he looked in the face of opposition, an opposition to his person, to his teachings, and even to his healing. He was born into a world of illness, lack, hate, inequality, and greed. Aren't we looking in the same faces, the same concepts? And with Christian Science, we are provided with something which already has proven that it can bring an end to these pain-causing concepts. It's provable and it's universal and reliable. It's applicable. It's a science. And the more we grasp what this means, the more we can see that miracles are divinely natural. The Christian Science textbook says on page 134, a miracle fulfills God's law, but doesn't violate this law. And a little later, you can read, the miracle introduces no disorder, but unfolds the primal order, establishing the signs of God's unchangeable law. In her lifetime, Mary Baker Eddy was one of the most known women in North America. She explored that the healing which followed her prayer were brought forth by an absolute principle, and that they weren't inexplicable miracles. They were reliable, and the laws of this healing can be taught to others. About this unfoldment, she wrote, for 3 years after my discovery, I thought the solution of this problem of mind healing, searched the scriptures and read little else, kept aloof from society, and devoted time and energy to discovering a positive rule. I knew the principle of all harmonious mind action to be God, and that cures were produced in primitive Christian healing by holy, uplifting faith. But I must know the signs of this healing, and I won my way to absolute conclusions through divine revelation, reason, and demonstration. So many healings were the results of Mary Baker Eddy's work and prayer. And there are several books where you can read about that. The reason why we also can bring healing to this world is because healing is based on a principle, on divine principle, and accomplished by it. That's why Mary Baker Eddy could teach so many pupils to follow her in this healing work. And with the help of Mary Baker Eddy's discovery, which is explained in her writings and especially in her textbook, everybody is able to live a life that brings healing and transformation. We have to start with ourselves, meaning we ourselves have to take a divine standpoint, and we have to live with this inner spiritual standpoint. This inevitably brings healing and transformation into the lives of others. When you light a candle in a dark room, everyone in the room gets more light. When you throw a stone in a lake, this stone causes not only one, but a lot of waves. And when you lift your own standpoint, this lets the light in that lifts up your surroundings and even the whole atmosphere. We might not always see this directly, but we can trust that it is this way because the divine principle is reliable and the power of truth and love always ultimately overcomes falsity and fear, just as light overcomes darkness. This rule of experience doesn't stop at companies or governments. It transforms the point of view, action, and lives of individuals everywhere. I had seen a documentary on modern human trafficking. Worldwide, over 2 million people are trafficked every year. And with the Ukraine crisis, this gets even worse at the moment. I was so shocked that I was paralyzed at first, and then I couldn't stop crying. I was completely lost in horror and sadness. I have to say that I'm kind of used to thinking about God all the time. It's like a constant listening to God no matter what I'm doing. And that's what I was doing in the middle of all this crying. Therefore, I could recognize this gentle touch of a thought. And the thought was, it must end in you. This is important for your own safety and for others. The quality of the thought was so bright, so commanding, and so pure. It was like a very loving mental touch. I stopped crying and began to pray. I was still sad, but I was also open to a solution because I understood that I had to take myself mentally out of this domino effect, so to speak. My love for others gave me the strength and my faith and the faith to follow the gentle thought that had told me, it must end in you. Yes, I could at least work within my own thinking, and that is what I did from then on. Shortly said, I prayed in prayer, I focused my thoughts on God instead of on the problem. On that day, I had 2 incredible demonstrations of protection in road traffic. Several people were, including myself, were involved and no one was hurt. And about 2 weeks later, I heard on the radio that a big human trafficking ring was uncovered, destroyed, and a large number of women and children were freed. So you can see that I'm talking about more than healing bodies. It's about transforming people. And in the end, it's about complete salvation. Every change happens in consciousness, and we can help facilitate that when we decide to let our candles, so to speak, to lit our candles, so to speak, let the light into our own viewpoint. There are so many opportunities in our day-to-day life. There are so many candles unlit. These candles are waiting to be lit by someone with a little spark in the heart and with some courage to lift up his or her own standpoint in order to let some fresh spiritual air in. When there is a thought that experiencing miracles seem difficult or far out of reach, it's helpful to remember that we all can experience miracles because the divine principle is everywhere and is impartial. So I'm deeply convinced that whatever anyone might be facing at the moment, it can be solved. And I trust that there are wonderful solutions for world affairs. Our world is a place of individuals. World affairs do happen because of individuals. Individuals can change, and we can be the ones who not only know this and trust, but we can be the change which is necessary. We can be example givers. We can be the sunbeam which reaches others. There is a way out of darkness. What is divinely natural can be experienced in our day-to-day life. And I deeply wish to give you hope and great anticipation with the message of my lecture. In the Bible, you can read, and that's a promise. And that's from 2 Corinthians. If any man be in Christ, he's a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. With all we can learn in Christian Science, anyone can learn how to take new, more spiritual viewpoints, so that old viewpoints pass away, and we can experience that all things actually become new. This kind of transformation and newness for ourselves and all others may seem miraculous, but it's divinely natural.